You're watching once again a YouTube video presentation of the University of Wyoming Center on Aging. I'm Scott Veach. I'm your host, and in this series we'll be discussing topics of interest for those who are caring for loved ones with dementia. We invite you to subscribe to the channel, and we hope that you'll hit that thumbs up like button. Both of those actions help our channel to grow and reach more people. And if you'll hit that notification bell, you'll be notified each time we upload a new video. We welcome you to part two of our discussion today. Our guest is Teresa Robinette. She is an occupational therapist in Casper, Wyoming. She also teaches that subject at Casper College. If you didn't catch our first part of this interview, we invite you to do that. It's still up. If you go back to the main page of Wyoming Dementia Together, once again, you'll be able to catch the first part of that interview. Also, we would ask that you would subscribe to the channel and hit that thumbs up like button. Again, both of those actions will help our channel to grow and to reach more people. We were talking about the Allen Cognitive Disabilities Model. A lot of things that we discussed in that and what it does. One of the things that it does do, it breaks down or assesses the individual to kind of where we can tell where they are along the timeline, early, middle, and late stages. What are some characteristics of the early stage?
So when I'm using that Allen's model and I'm gathering information and things like that, and based on how well they're following directions, that kind of working memory and things like that, sometimes with that earlier things, we can look at where they are, kind of help make determinations of what to expect, how to help manage those things. And so a lot of times what I'll tell caregivers when we're in those stages, have them do as much as they can right now for themselves, even if it takes longer. Just, it might be easier just to do it for them, but we really, really need to have them doing some of these occupations and ADLs for themselves. So maybe instead of, my example would be a general term we use in rehab would be called setup. So instead of for example, your loved one having to go and retrieve their clothes out of the dresser, maybe they're getting confused, maybe they get a little disoriented about where things are. Maybe they could still dress themselves if the clothes are just laid out and they're laid out in the correct sequence in which you want to put them on. And then suddenly they're pretty close to being independent and dressing themselves, but they just needed one or two little things changed in that environment to help them be really successful. So those are some of the things that we'll look for in those stages, just looking at the environment. And very much, having things accessible that they need to see, things that I want them interacting with. Then if somebody's receiving a score that we would maybe kind of characterize more of those middle stages, starting to make that transition, maybe now we're seeing more of changes in motor, sensory motor, some vision changes. So as a caregiver, I might be educating my caregivers in, okay, now we might have to be giving them a little bit more physical assistance. Maybe it's starting with the toothbrush, maybe giving a little bit of hand over hand assistance to their mouth. But then once it's in that position, they're able to continue with it. Maybe you as the caregiver demonstrate what the task is that you want them to do instead of saying and verbalizing. Maybe it's doing more of a demonstrating. And then when we look at things more like late stage, it's definitely, we're going to see changes in that sensory motor, those physical pieces. And so at that point, I really want my caregivers looking at comfort, really looking at mealtime, really looking at, maybe how can we help them be as independent as possible with feeding themselves. So maybe instead of using a bunch of utensils, maybe we look at doing more like finger foods, just keeping it really simple, but maybe making that shift towards, okay, maybe we're not dressing, maybe we're not doing this, but I want them feeding themselves. I want them doing these things, these really basic seated tasks, and just having them do as much as they can and being as independent as possible.
I want to go back to one of the early stage activities that you talked about. We should say that Teresa made this presentation to our group back in June, and we're kind of going over it again so that those of you who weren't able to be with us the first time would be able to catch up. You talked about in early stages the importance of including them in leisure activities, some things that they may have done or enjoyed in the past, they're still able to do.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like leisure just gets so overlooked. And I know as a practitioner, sometimes when I'm working on leisure or doing things that just look like fun, folks get worried. They're like, no, we're supposed to be working. I think that's just kind of how our culture is, work, work, work. But the fact of the matter is engagement and leisure is incredibly important. It's an incredibly important thing. And you can start some things, as we know, somebody, when they receive a diagnosis of dementia, things like that, throughout that continuum, things that can stay consistent and stay the same. So whether that is listening to music, whether that is going on an outing, a familiar outing, keeping that outing consistent. The other thing that I think is really important is just sticking with those routines, different things that are very repetitive also in nature. So leisure activities that don't require a lot of new adjustments or things like that, but are really, really repetitive. So maybe a simple or basic card game, bingo games, anything that's also going to incorporate your loved one where they have to use both hands, I think are wonderful for leisure. So maybe that's just something as simple as maybe a simple craft activity on the table. Cooking also, I think kind of having your loved one help with meal preparation when appropriate. But any of those tasks in the kitchen you might have them do that's going to be really, really repetitive. I think you're going to see your loved one really enjoy that. So thinking about that in leisure is, what are tasks that I can do consistently in a repetitive nature and would use both hands? I think if it has all those qualities, that's going to be a really great activity for them.
Also, in the middle stage activities, I thought it was really interesting what you had to say about mealtime, simplifying meals, even the presentation, the layout of the dining plate and the utensils on the table all come into play.
Yeah, especially as we see maybe some vision changes, looking at the table setting. Is it a white tablecloth with a white plate? Sometimes that can be a really hard thing to see. So looking at how we set up the table, maybe having a darker tablecloth, bright contrast, whatever that is, that can really help just draw the attention of that individual with dementia to whatever it is we're doing. Or maybe it's even just serving them one dish at a time. If we put a whole bunch of things out there and they have to make a lot of different choices and decisions, that can be really difficult. I mean, that can be difficult for somebody whose cognition isn't changing, let alone when we have somebody that maybe it takes a little bit more time to make choices, make decisions. If we have too much food out there, sometimes they'll just stop and they'll just check out and they won't eat. And we'll start to see some real issues then with calorie intake, nutrition, different things. So maybe it's saying, okay, let's just start with the mashed potatoes. Then when they're done with mashed potatoes, then we'll go to the green beans and then we'll move on. And that just get things out of there that don't need to be.
Right. And then in the late stage activities, still you were talking about leisure activities. Music played a big role in that too, that you addressed.
Yeah, I think definitely late stage, I like to really look at sensory pieces. So hearing, vision, tactile, smells, taste, things that don't require maybe verbal communication, things that don't require too much of that interaction, but they can just experience things. So yeah, maybe that's listening to music and then maybe having like some scents or smells that go with the song. So if it's the holiday time, listening to Christmas music and then having some scents brought in that coordinate with that. If it's springtime, having some music that coordinates to that, or summer, and then having some of those smells of like water and outdoors and beaches and things like that. But things where our loved one can be passive, but still be receiving this input, still be receiving things that we as humans enjoy. Especially thinking about like how they lived their life. What was something that they really enjoyed? If they really enjoyed going to the beach, maybe bringing in some seashells that they could hold while they listen to music, listen to sounds, have some of those different smells where, maybe they're not having to be active, but they could passively still be receiving these experiences.
I think that's really key too. You said they can be passively receiving the experiences, because just because they don't physically acknowledge it doesn't mean that they're not enjoying what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And it's still a type of engagement. It's still something going on besides just kind of looking around in a building or a facility or whatever it is. It's still a type of engagement. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned at late stage also, again, getting back to mealtime, that changes as well. It can be difficult to hold the cup, to use a knife and fork.
It can be. Yeah. Maybe the utensils are just too confusing. Maybe they're just frustrating. So how can I take their food that they like or enjoy and do it as a finger food? If that's not possible, if maybe they're having to have something pureed or things like that, but still then maybe just a spoon and a cup. But yeah, just kind of looking at simplifying that and then having them do as much as possible. So, maybe we don't have to have all the silverware. Maybe we don't have to have all those different pieces.
Boy, this is being a caregiver. It's such a moving target. I mean, no 2 days are the same, and there's always change and always new things to consider. Patience is a key, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is, and I think sometimes folks, just hitting that pause button a little bit. We ask a question to an individual and they don't answer. We ask another question, they don't answer. We ask another question, they don't answer. Well, every time I'm asking that question, I'm almost kind of resetting and pushing it further down the line. So I also just advise to caregivers, even if they don't respond, give them 30 to 40 seconds, which feels like a really long time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But that might be just kind of what they need to process. And then if they don't answer, then maybe reword it. Also, maybe look at, okay, maybe verbally this isn't working. Would it help if I write? Would it help if I had a picture? Kind of just looking at some different things with communication. But yeah, I definitely recommend with caregivers, like just giving yourself a lot of grace and a lot of pause and a lot of time. And just because something's not working, maybe, or it worked the day before, there's no good solution, but it's just kind of keep moving with it, keep kind of rolling with the punches for sure.
Rolling with the punches. That's one of the things that's key, no question. We're kind of coming to the end of our time, but one of the things that you addressed in your talk, you talked about occupations for every stage and things like reminiscing and relaxation and comfort. You touched on the sensory a moment ago. What are we talking about in those things when you mentioned them before?
So as an occupational therapist, I spent a lot of time thinking about obviously occupations
Right.
and what folks can do. And there's just some really important things that I think as we're helping a loved one with dementia and we, are kind of being told this is where we're going. This is the path we're going. There's things that are appropriate no matter what. And making sure they're comfortable, that they have a comfortable place, because sometimes, maybe a behavior will come out or things like that. And it's because they're uncomfortable or there's like a wrinkle in their clothes or there's something there, a noxious stimuli, if you will, and they're not quite able to verbalize, hey, this is uncomfortable or I don't like this. So I really encourage caregivers like be thinking about their clothing, thinking about where they're sitting, how they're sitting, because sometimes we might see some of these difficult things or behaviors and maybe it's stemming from something and they're just not really able to act on that appropriately or make those adjustments appropriately. Also things that they enjoy to do that relaxes them. I really recommend caregivers finding those things, whatever that is, whether that is sitting in the chair, watching TV, whether that's playing a simple game, whatever that might be. Just encourage that because sometimes if they're feeling some anxiety, some stress, having something that helps kind of bring them down, something that is very calming. And we also brought up this term legacy work. And this is a term that I've heard kind of passed around a few different times. And I really encourage caregivers, really have that, start kind of thinking with your loved one, what were things that they really enjoyed, things that they felt really passionate about, if they were engaged in photography, if they had collections, different things like that, going through these different things. And maybe, if they want to put a message with something for someone or organizing these things. So, for example, I had a family member quilting and she had an extensive collection of quilts that she had made over the years. And one of the things that we did as a family was sit down and she talked about the quilts and talked about how she made it and where some of the fabric came from and who she made it from. And then that was an opportunity for her to say, hey, I want you to have this as well too. So I think kind of just looking at, what were those things that they valued and then starting to have those conversations and not even necessarily having a conversation, but sometimes just going through and just looking at these things visually can be a very rewarding task, I think, for a caregiver and a loved one to do together.
If someone has questions, and boy, I can imagine they might have a lot of questions when we're talking about this, can they get in touch with your office at the college and you can maybe give them some guidance on where to go next?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Here at Casper College, I feel very lucky. I have an amazing program, wonderful group of colleagues, great group of students. My students are amazing. So if people have questions or things like that, we also sometimes when community members approach us with different problems or concerns or things like that, we have different resources and kind of some problem solving things. So yeah, I'd love to visit with folks if they have questions, things like that, because really here at the college, we have some great support and some great ideas and things like that. So yeah, you can, maybe we could put in the link, my email, my office number. But yeah, I really encourage if people have questions about OT, if they have questions about just in general, please reach out to me. So
all of that information will be available in the dialog box below. And so that'll be there for you to check it out. Our guest has been Teresa Robinette. She is an occupational therapist in Casper, Wyoming. She also teaches the subject at Casper College. Teresa, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Scott. This was fun.
You've been watching once again a YouTube video presentation of the University of Wyoming Center on Aging. We invite you to subscribe to our channel. We hope that you'll hit that thumbs up like button. Those actions will help our channel to grow and reach more people. And if you'll tap that notification bell, you'll be notified automatically each time we upload a new video. I'm Scott Veach. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you again next time.